Okay, so in this episode, or installment, or whatever you call it with YouTube, we're getting a look at an apparently very rare piece of Apple II hardware, the Yam Soundbuster. Now, I'm chuckling a little bit here because the name kinda sounds like a ripoff of a card we all know, but this card, according to the limited documentation I could find, actually predates the Creative product by a few years. It seems to be around early 1987 that it came out versus around 1990 for the Soundbuster. So that's kind of funny. And when I say limited documentation, I mean limited. Literally the only official documentation I've been able to find of the Soundbuster is this advertisement for the PC version of the card. Gentlemen prefer the Soundbuster. I see. As opposed to those ruffians who prefer the Mockingbird. And check this out, apparently there was a quote-unquote all-Soundbuster concert shown on American television. Now that I would love to see. Apart from that ad though, there's pretty close to zero out there. The Apple archives have this little text description of it, but that's it. This card came with an extremely early Apple IIe I purchased late last year. I was sort of goaded into it by other vintage computer enthusiasts after I enthusiastically proclaimed that with the purchase of an Apple II GS, I now had every main model of Apple II there was. Anyway, somebody kindly mentioned that I was missing a couple of variants of the IIe, and yeah. So I ended up buying this one as well as an enhanced model. This early one appears to be all original too. It has the early tan keys with the white legends, gold power supply, and a Rev A motherboard. The motherboard is quite early. Unlike later motherboards that use a machine-printed 4-digit date code, this one has a handwritten serial. Finding a Rev A board still installed in an early IIe is pretty uncommon. When Apple introduced the Rev B with its double high-res graphics as an upgrade option, a lot of people jumped on that. Like, a lot. Anyway, pro tip, if you're like me and actually trying to collect an original Rev A, check that it has a copyright date of 1982 and has the letter A right here. But beware, Apple used the Rev A designation twice, the second time on a board that was copyrighted 1984. Anyway, like I said, this one is early. Like literally this is the earliest serial number I've ever seen or can find online, 1320. Remember, there were 4 million IIes made. In all my online searching, the closest serial number I've found to this one is about 20 above it. The serial number itself is interesting too. Apple used a 4-digit prefix for their serial numbers to denote which model of computer it was. The original Apple II was A2S1, the II Plus was A2S2, and so on. However, this IIe shares the same A2S2 prefix with the II Plus, so that means there's 2 machines out there with exactly the same serial number, which I'm not sure Apple really intended. I note slightly later IIes have a prefix of 1 A2S2. I'm not sure if the factory goofed or what there. This early IIe came with some other cards too, like the CPM card, a parallel printer card, and of course a Unidisc card. But definitely most interesting is the Yam Soundbuster. The thing that got me really curious about this card was the little control box that has the stereo outputs and microphone inputs that it came with. I'm used to my Apple II sound coming from an internal speaker, so I was immediately intrigued by this, but initially when I first tried it out, I couldn't get it to do anything. I plugged one of the outputs into my Commodore 1702, but could not get any sound out of it at all. Through trial and error, I eventually discovered that the card needed to be plugged into slot 2. I wasn't expecting too much anyway. This card isn't very impressive looking. From what I've read, it basically does sound synthesis, albeit pretty primitively. And since I'm already pulling old hardware from the shelf anyway, for this video I'm going to dig out my original Apple II color composite monitor instead of the Commodore 1702 I usually use, which will be kind of heresy anyway. The picture on this monitor is really nice and sharp, and being Apple, the two just look right together. Okay, so let's fire up the software here and see if we can get any life out of this. Doesn't want to boot. Aha, interesting. I'm putting in a perfectly legit program here in BASIC, and it's giving an undefined error. So yeah, something is amiss. Okay, so I borrowed a known good IIe motherboard and began swapping RAM chips one at a time until my program worked. Turns out the last one on the right was buggered. Now my program runs okay. Let's see if we can boot the Soundbuster program now. As the Apple monitor has no sound, I'm going to plug in an old stereo I have out of sight on the floor. That'll give sufficient amplification, I think. Okay, let's try again. By the way, there are 2 discs, the Soundbuster Master Disc, which you boot from, and the Sounds Disc. So we can see where the name Yam comes from now. It appears this device was created primarily for educational purposes. I've certainly never seen an Apple II game that mentions supporting this card. Okay, so let's see how they've laid out the keyboard. Okay, so I think first we probably need to load an instrument of some kind, and then maybe we can tap out a few notes. So we'll just switch over to our sound disk here, and then we can have a look at what instruments we have available to play with. Yeah, it looks like it's actually got quite a few instruments you can play around with here. Well, I think I'll start with a piano. I mean, that just kind of feels like the default one you would typically start with when you're working with synth sounds. And we'll just see what do we get here. Wow, that actually sounds all right. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my old ad-lib card from years ago. It's too bad I don't have any actual, musical ability. No, really, I have zero talent. Alright, well, let's just try playing this mess back. Slight pause while the Apple II adjusts its accoutrements. Oh boy, I think this is a little bit of a heavy lift for this IIe. Alrighty, so that was horrible, but my Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was kind of an afterthought there. Let me try it again. I'm going to go for it correctly from the start, and we'll see if we can get something that's at least somewhat respectable here. I do kind of like the way the notes are all arranged in order on the top row of keys. It kind of makes it a little bit easier for a beginner to sort of figure things out. I don't really know how the program is calculating the different notes, like if it's actually listening as I'm doing things and timing my keystrokes. It's a little bit weird. You can only play on the upper keyboard, so I'm really not sure how it's deciding, if it's a quarter beat or a whole note or whatever it's doing there. This tune's missing something. I feel like I need more cowbell. So we're going to do that. We're just going to change over to cowbell here, and we're going to add it and just go nuts. Going to really, explore the space. Well, I was expecting a little bit more of a plunky kind of sound, but, this is 1987 technology. What are you going to do? Let's try another one. Let's try a guitar. I'm just so used to the Apple IIe and its squeaky speaker sound that even a card like this with some inherent limitations still feels kind of like a quantum leap forward. I think this one is called a vibraphone. Let's give this one a try. I'll try one more here. How about the conga? Yeah, okay, well, let's try one of the sample tunes. Actually, I think there's only one sample tune on the sound disk. I just want to see if it plays at normal and, if it's my incompetent keyboard skills that are leading to this little delay problem. And that sort of confirms my suspicion that the computer is not really able to keep up. This was a pre-composed song, so in theory it should have played pretty well. And I don't know where, I know this song, I can't remember the title. I know I've seen it maybe in a Disney movie somewhere. If anybody knows the name, maybe let me know in the comments. I know it's just on the tip of my tongue, but I can't quite get it. So another neat thing this software can do is it can actually take two sounds and sort of mix them together. And you can actually set up what's called a sequence with one of the instruments called the background instrument, and it will basically play that sequence with that instrument as the background while you play with the other instrument in the foreground. And you can totally edit the sequences too and make them into whatever you want, but in this case I'm just going to use some of the pre-programmed ones that are included on the sound disk. Let's try some soul. Let's switch it up here a little bit, and we'll change the background music to, let's say, a bass guitar, and we'll change the sequence to rock music and see how that comes out. I mean, yeah, it's not mind-blowing, but, given you're doing this on an Apple II, I think it's pretty neat. Just for fun, I'll mess with the tempo a little bit and see what happens. It's good when you have a competent virtual bass player who can cover up your mistakes on your own instrument. I couldn't quite figure out how to edit the sequences themselves properly. It looks like basically you go sort of beat by beat and change the notes to your preferences, but I couldn't figure out how to set the notes the way that I wanted them to be. Okay, so let's try something that I think might be kind of neat. You can actually hook up a microphone to this thing and it will actually sample the sound, and then you can kind of play around with it on the keyboard just like an instrument. And I think you might be able to potentially save each recorded sound as a sound, and then you could actually play both together, similar to what we did earlier, so that'd be kind of cool. You basically hold down the spacebar and then speak to record.
Hi.
I don't know why, but when you hit spacebar and start recording, it often does this kind of warbling thing that gets mixed in with your recording. I don't know if it's a problem with the card or the computer's just not coping or something, but yeah, it's kind of annoying, unfortunately. Come to think of it, that voice is kind of reminding me of the Pinecone computer from the movie Electric Dreams. In fact, a few sources I've seen suggest the quote-unquote Pinecone computer featured in the movie is actually a well-disguised Apple II. Who knows, maybe the special effects people had an assist from the Soundbuster.
Oh my God.
Another neat thing you can do with the software is view and modify the sounds themselves by adjusting their properties. I'm not going to pretend I have a clue what I'm doing here, but at least you can sort of see what aspects of each sound you can modify. And besides, I get all these cool waves on my screen. This is kind of reminding me of one of those heart monitor things they hook you up to at the hospital. You can edit the peaks and troughs of the wave here and thus change characteristics like pitch, duration, and so on. I'll mess around with the pitch and length here and just see what happens. We can also modify the sound envelope. In music, the envelope describes how a sound changes over time. Features include the attack, sustain, and decay. Changing the shape of the envelope changes all of these characteristics and thus the sound itself. Yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but it's definitely changing the nature of the sound. If I had a better understanding of the concepts, I probably could do something pretty neat with this thing. But that would be part of the fun of having it if you were a kid as an educational device. It's really neat to just kind of play around with all these different settings and learn through experimentation. One interesting thing about the Soundbuster software is that it appears to be programmed almost entirely in BASIC. That means you could, potentially, with some reverse engineering, control the Soundbuster directly and then use it in your own BASIC programs. I'd almost bet the original package might have come with some sort of technical documentation that would have explained how to do something like that. I will dump the software and provide a link in the video description at some point in the future when I get time, for anyone who'd like to check out how the software works. I can't imagine it'd be too difficult to recreate the Soundbuster. I don't see anything on the card itself that is super proprietary. It's a pretty cool card for its time, and I know as a kid I would have loved to have been able to play with something like this and make and record my own music. The interface is fairly simple, and the software is quite well featured for what it is. If this came with a reasonable price tag, I would have been all over it, although my parents probably wouldn't have sprung $1,000+ on an Apple IIe. So yeah, that's kind of it. If you have a Soundbuster or come across one, feel free to drop me a line. I'd love to see an original manual if one ever existed. Also wouldn't mind seeing the PC version of this card and checking out the similarities and differences with that. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.